And I was so excited for this plot twist that I thought I had predicted, and then like, I hadn't. So the book could have been more entertaining that way. So, AXIOM'S End by Lindsay Ellis. The ending wasn't really an ending. Before reading this ending, I would have said that I was a fan in general of open endings, that everything didn't need to wrap up in the story. But that was before I read an open ending as unsatisfying as the one here, and I have now decided that I do not like all open endings. Because the ending ended mid-goodbye between Ampersand, the alien, and Cora, our POV character. And it was just so, like, what? I don't really want to end the book in the middle of a conversation, even if the place where that conversation is cut off totally ties in with the themes of the story. Because what happens is, Ampersand is about to leave Earth, he's done here, skedaddle time. Cora is like, no, don't go, I love you. And Cora says, humans manage somehow with the limits of human communication. And then Ampersand responds, but I am not human. And that's the end of the book. And when I finished this, my first question was like, but wait, does he actually leave or not? Because by saying this, Ampersand is saying like, hey, like, I can't fit in with human culture, I'm leaving. But then also, it feels like the kind of conversation which could end in him being convinced to stay because it's super intimate and beautiful and about like the wonderful communication that can happen even if there are limits. So, which is it? Is he staying? Is he leaving? Of course, there is a sequel to this book where we could find out this answer. But I didn't like this book enough to read the sequel, and so I am just left with this book that feels like it didn't end very well. Like, the plot didn't get tied up. But then I asked myself, but what plot are we even talking about? And I can't point to a specific plot thread that I'm like, this wasn't tied up enough. But then in my heart, reading this ending, I was just like, that's it? So it left a bad taste in my brain. And I want to unpack that. And I will also be saying the things I liked about this book because it is not without good parts. But then here are some plot twists that I wish would have happened that didn't, but I was really hoping that they would. In this book, it's built up a lot that the aliens are scared of humans because humans are like flesh eaters and aliens are like, we don't know how to deal with people who eat other animals? What? And then there's a few times in this book where Cora is up against one of the enemy aliens, and it'd be really nice in that moment if Cora could threaten him or scare him off, and I kept waiting for her to go in for a bite, because you know, as soon as she started trying to bite one of those guys, it might have just backed off in terror. Let's talk about some other things that I liked before we get into the nitty-gritty of other things I didn't like. And one of my favorite explorations in here is connected to Ampersand, the alien. I love how much screen time Ampersand got that we really did get to know him. But that sentence took me 4 takes, by the way. Did get to know him. And I also really appreciated Ampersand because it cracked open this interesting concept, which is anthropomorphizing aliens and making them likable versus weird. And this is a thing that I've heard talked a little bit about on Lindsay Ellis's YouTube channel, but it isn't a thing that I'd like really thought about until reading this book, and then this book got me thinking about it, and it was beautiful. Because when you're writing aliens for fiction, you can make them really relatable and like humans, or you can make them really weird and seem really extraterrestrial alien. And this book not only does its own balancing act of friendly versus weird alien, it also explores this because there are human scientists studying the aliens, and they're always telling each other like, hey, don't anthropomorphize it. Like, just because its body posture looks angry to us doesn't mean that the alien's actually angry because its culture is so vastly different. So we've got that push away from anthropomorphizing in the text. But then also in the text, characters are constantly talking about them as if they're humans. They're giving them gendered human pronouns. They're reading their body language as if they're human. And the thing is, the text only rewards characters for doing this. That when a character says, oh, this alien looks scared or angry or happy or relaxed, they're like usually right. Because it turns out you can just read alien body posture. And it also really helped that the physical descriptions of Ampersand and the other aliens like him were so good, because the alien kept getting described over and over and over throughout the book, and every time we would get a slightly different description or a little bit more detail here or there, or learn more about the legs or the arms or the neck. And then slowly, the picture in my mind of these aliens became clearer and clearer. And it was a beautiful process, honestly. That is one of the best parts of the book, I would say, is just the mastery of craft there in describing the aliens' physiology. But then let us transition to talking about where the exposition was less good, which unfortunately is for most things, and this is a weird problem. Hold up, stick with me. Okay, but first, quick aside. So this book takes place in 2007, and I did not realize this for many chapters. This is entirely my fault. This book starts out by giving us the literal date. I just ignored it. Every chapter has the date in the beginning. For many chapters, I just ignored it. I have even seen a video of Lindsay Ellis talking about her book and talking about how it takes place in a pre-smartphone era. And yet when I was reading the book, I completely forgot. And then I was thinking like, wait, they don't know what's on the news. Why don't they just look it up on their phone? But then I would also like to push back, because the main thing in chapter 1 that's supposed to put you in 2007 is the Fergalicious song comes on the radio. And I don't really think a song is an effective way to set a time scene. Because if a song was popular enough at the time it came out, for now us to still remember it and be able to refer to a time period by naming that song is also popular enough to conceivably come on the radio now. Okay, but now let us get to the heart of my complaint on the prose/tone/whatever this is called of Axiom's End. And this is, the exposition is too lean. I don't think I've ever had this complaint about a book before, because usually it's like, oh, the exposition is too info dumpy all at the beginning, it's just like too front loaded. This exposition was not front loaded enough, because I was confused and coming to the wrong conclusions over and over and over for at least the first third of the book, and then it became a little bit more rare as I got to know it, but still happened. Let me take you through, just in the first few pages, how many incredibly wrong conclusions I drew because of the lack of adequate exposition. The book starts out, on the morning of the second meteor, Cora's 1989 Toyota Camry gave up the Ghost for good. At $800, she had paid more for it than it was worth, but back then she had been a freshman in college and desperate for a car. In the 2 years since, she'd grown accustomed to it. So now I think, okay, so she's a junior in college now, because she was a freshman 2 years ago, so like junior-ish. So I'm placing her in my mind. Okay, college student, junior. Both of those conclusions are wrong, but I won't learn that for like another chapter or two. As the Camry went into its final death throes, Demi, who was locking the front door on her way to work, froze. So then I think, okay, Cora is a college student, Demi probably her roommate. This is also wrong. But then I haven't been given any context to understand her as anything else. She got out of the car, approached her mother, and asked, "Can you give me a ride to work?" And this is where we learned that Demi is her mother several sentences later. And then I had to go, wait, what? Because even though this is written third-person perspective, it's third-person limited, which means everything we get is filtered through Cora's voice and her personality and her perspective on the world. And people don't usually call their mothers by their first name. But when Demi's introduced, all we get is her first name. And it feels like there's such disconnect. But it was just another weird detail that threw me for a loop and made me go, what? And this is still like page 1 and 2. And continuing on that front of too little exposition, I would also argue that in character work, there is also too little exposition. Because aside from Cora and Ampersand, these characters never felt well defined for me. Let me give you an example. Like the CIA agent, Agent Saul. But most of his characterization just felt like Cora complaining about how rude and mean he was to her. And then Cora was thinking like, oh, he's the bad cop, like so rude and mean and always working against me and making my life harder. And I'm like, girl, what are you even talking about? Like, he's a little snarky, but it's not that bad. But it disconnected me so hard from both Cora and Saul because I felt like she was making conclusions based on information that I didn't have about him. And I'm like, how did you even reach that conclusion? I'm confused about what is happening in this book. Okay, let's round this off with things I liked better. I've heard a common complaint of other people reviewing this book that they didn't like Cora as a narrator, as a character. I don't think we're supposed to like Cora, like a little bit, but she's a pretty flawed person, and I don't think that makes her a bad character. I think it makes her actually a really interesting character, and I thoroughly enjoyed her snarkiness, her quippiness. I could definitely just imagine Lindsay Ellis saying a bunch of stuff. You can very well hear her voice coming through here. And then also, a beautiful part of this book that was super interesting was Cora's relationship with the alien Ampersand. I heard this book described as a mix of Arrival and The Shape of Water, and that is completely accurate because it has got the interesting linguistic alien first contact of arrival, and the interesting relationship between the human and the alien, like in The Shape of Water. It's not a romantic relationship, thank goodness, but definitely if Ampersand had been a human, a lot of these scenes between them would have had some romantic tension in there. So, comment with an alien emoji for our beautiful buddy Ampersand.